I stood in the center of our dining room wearing my best dress while 200 guests watched my husband Conrad hand me an apron. The fabric was cheap cotton, blue with white trim, the kind you buy at discount stores. He held it out with both hands like it was a gift, his smile wide and performative. "Marlene," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "since you're no longer earning your keep around here, you'll be serving tonight." The room erupted in laughter. Wealthy men in designer suits, women dripping with jewelry, all of them laughing at me like I was entertainment. Our 25th anniversary dinner, and I was the punchline. My hands trembled as I took the apron, the fabric rough against my fingers. I looked at our children seated at the family table. My oldest son Xavier stared at his plate. My daughter Kimber sighed like I was embarrassing her. Only my middle son Drew met my eyes, and what I saw there was pity. Conrad leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "Don't make a scene," he whispered. "Just play along." I looked down at the apron in my hands, then around the room at faces I'd known for decades. A woman near the back, someone I'd considered a friend, whispered to her husband just loud enough for me to hear. She used to own all of this. I locked eyes with Xavier, my firstborn, the son I'd stayed up with through colic and nightmares and college exam stress. Surely he would say something. Surely he would stand up for his mother. But he looked away, reaching for his wine glass like it held answers. Kimber let out another sigh, this one louder, more dramatic. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling, making it clear my humiliation bored her. Drew stood halfway, his chair scraping against hardwood, but Conrad shot him a look that made him sit back down. My youngest, always the peacemaker, always trying to hold broken things together. I felt something shift inside me then, something that had been bending for years finally snapping clean. The laughter continued around me, sharp and cruel. I folded the apron carefully, smoothing out the wrinkles with hands that had stopped shaking. Then I smiled. Not the tight, placating smile I'd perfected over 25 years of marriage. Something different. Something cold and final. I set the apron on the table in front of Conrad, turned and walked toward the door. My heels clicked against marble in the sudden silence. "Marlene," Conrad called after me, his voice sharp with warning. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard someone ask what was happening. Someone else laughed nervously. I kept walking until I reached my car. My name is Marlene Callahan, though I'd been Marlene Drexler for 25 years. I helped build everything that man owned, every brick of his empire laid on a foundation I provided. And tonight, he'd reminded me I didn't even belong at the table. I sat in my car in the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel, watching through the windows as the party continued without me. They'd moved on already, someone else making a toast. I thought about the girl I'd been at 23, standing in a notary's office with my father's farmland deed in one hand and Conrad's business plan in the other. How certain I'd been that we were building something together. How naive. Conrad had a story he told at parties, one he'd perfected over the years. He'd started with nothing, he'd say. Built his logistics empire from scratch through hard work and vision. I was barely mentioned except as the wife who supported him. But what he didn't know, what he'd never bothered to learn, was that while he was building his empire on my land and my money and my sacrifice, I was building mine. Quietly, carefully, the help of people he'd dismissed as irrelevant. I started the engine and drove away from the house I'd decorated, the life I'd cultivated, the man I'd stopped loving somewhere around year 7. 25 years ago, I sat in a notary's office with morning sickness so bad I could barely hold the pen. My father had died 6 months earlier, leaving me 200 acres of farmland in Lancaster County and a broken heart. Conrad sat beside me, his hand on my knee, his voice gentle as he explained how the loan would work. "It's just temporary," he'd said, "just until the business gets off the ground." The farmland was worth $300,000, enough collateral to secure the loan Conrad needed for his first warehouse and fleet of trucks. I was pregnant with Xavier, 23 years old, so in love I couldn't see straight. The notary, an older woman named Beatrice, had hesitated before sliding the papers across her desk. "You sure about giving it all up for him?" she'd asked. Conrad had laughed, squeezed my hand. "We're partners. What's mine is hers." I'd signed. Watched my father's legacy become loan collateral. Watched Conrad take that money and build Drexler Logistics into a regional powerhouse, then a national one. The farmland was sold within 2 years to cover expansion costs. Conrad had apologized, said it was necessary, promised me the world in return. I'd believed him. The notary's question echoed in my head for years afterward. I sat in my car outside the house, engine running, and pulled out my phone. Social media was already lighting up with photos from the party. Conrad standing at the head of the table, raising his glass. Someone had caught the moment he handed me the apron, the caption reading, "When you remember who wears the pants, relationship goals." I scrolled through comments, each one a small knife. Then I heard voices approaching from the house. Conrad was standing on the front steps talking to someone I didn't recognize. "She just raised the kids," he said, lighting a cigar. "I built this from the ground up. Everything you see, every success, that's me." She contributed nothing except complaints and asking for more credit cards. The other man laughed. "Women, right?" My expression didn't change. I'd learned years ago not to react where people could see. But inside, something crystallized. I put the car in reverse, backed out of the driveway, and drove to a storage unit I'd rented 3 years ago under my maiden name. Inside were filing cabinets I'd been filling methodically. Bank statements, property records, signed agreements, copies of everything Conrad thought only he had access to. I unlocked the drawer labeled insurance and pulled out the ledgers I'd been keeping since year 3 of our marriage. Harold Reeves worked out of a small office above a dry cleaner in a part of town Conrad would never visit. I'd found him 12 years ago through a friend's recommendation. A quiet accountant who specialized in helping women protect assets their husbands didn't know existed. He looked like someone's grandfather, with wire-rimmed glasses and cardigans. "Marlene," he said when I walked in at 9 p.m. I saw the pictures. I sat across from his desk, setting down the ledgers. "Tell me where we are." Harold pulled up files on his computer. For 12 years, we'd been moving money. Small amounts at first, redirected from household accounts Conrad never monitored. Dividends from investments I'd made with my inheritance. Proceeds from a rental property I'd bought using settlement money Conrad thought I'd spent on furniture. "You have $2.3 million in the offshore account," Harold said. "Another $1.8 million in the real estate trust. The stock portfolio under your maiden name is worth roughly $900,000. He looked at me over his glasses. "Are we ready?" I thought about that apron, about my children's faces, about 25 years of being erased. "Are we ready?" I asked. Harold nodded. "Whenever you say go." I leaned back in the chair. "Then let's go." The fight with Kimber happened 3 days after the anniversary dinner. She'd called asking for money, as she did most months. I'd said no for the first time in her life. "Are you serious?" she'd shrieked. "After everything Dad does for you?" I'd stayed calm. "What exactly does your father do for me, Kimber?" That had set her off. 20 minutes of screaming about how I was ungrateful, lazy, a parasite living off Conrad's success. "You don't contribute anything," she'd said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You just sit around spending money you didn't earn. At least Dad works." I'd listened to every word, my face expressionless, my heart turning to ice. When she finally stopped to breathe, I'd said quietly, "I'll remember you said that." Then I'd hung up. That evening, I sat in Harold's office again. "I want to make a change to my living trust." Harold pulled up the documents. The trust contained assets I'd been accumulating, set to be divided among my children upon my death. I pointed to Kimber's name. "Remove her. Everything that would have gone to her goes to charity instead." Harold didn't question it, just made the changes and printed new documents for my signature. Some bridges once burned aren't worth rebuilding. I noticed the necklace at the anniversary dinner, but it didn't click until later. A delicate platinum chain with a teardrop sapphire, unmistakable because I'd chosen it myself 10 years ago as a gift for Conrad's 40th birthday. He'd said he wanted to give it to his mother. I'd thought it was sweet. Now that same necklace rested against the throat of his executive assistant, Felicity, a woman 30 years younger than me. She'd been at the party, hovering near Conrad all evening, laughing too loud at his jokes, her hand lingering on his arm. I'd been trained not to notice such things. But sitting in my car after I'd left, scrolling through party photos, I'd seen it clearly. The necklace I'd bought, hanging where it had no business being. Message received. I pulled out my phone and texted someone whose number I'd kept for situations like this. Get me the apartment records for Conrad Drexler. Specifically, any properties leased or purchased in the past 5 years. The response came within an hour. 3 addresses, all luxury apartments in downtown Pittsburgh, all with monthly payments tracing back to accounts I recognized. One was currently occupied by a tenant listed as F. Morrison. Felicity. I smiled in the darkness of my car. Harold called me into his office the next morning with excitement in his voice. You need to see this, he said, pulling up documents on his laptop. He'd been doing a deep dive into Conrad's offshore accounts, the ones he thought were hidden. He made a critical mistake, Harold said, highlighting a section of a tax return from 2015. When he filed jointly that year, he declared ownership of these accounts to save on taxes. I leaned closer. Which means, Harold smiled, which means that legally you own half of everything in these accounts, and when he signed the joint return, he acknowledged that ownership. The accounts contained roughly $8 million, money Conrad had been siphoning from the business for years, money he'd hidden from everyone except Harold's forensic accounting software. Can we access it? I asked. Harold shook his head. Not yet. But in a divorce proceeding, these accounts become marital assets, subject to division. He tried to hide money from you, but actually gave you legal claim to it. I stared at the screen, at the numbers representing years of Conrad's deception. He played himself, I said softly. Harold nodded. Technically, you own half of everything, and he signed it. My husband had built his own trap. The lake house appeared on my radar 3 weeks later. Felicity had been posting photos on social media, artfully staged shots of morning coffee on a dock, sunset views over water. I'd run a reverse image search and traced it to a property in the Pocono Mountains. Property records showed it had been purchased 18 months ago for $750,000. The deed was in Felicity's name, but the down payment of $200,000 had come from a joint account I recognized. I sat in my lawyer's office, showing her the evidence. Bryn, my college roommate, had gone to law school while I'd gotten married and pregnant. Now she was a partner at one of Pittsburgh's most prestigious family law firms. She looked at the documents and whistled. He used marital funds to buy his mistress a house. She started making notes. This gets judges angry. I leaned back, looking at photos of Felicity's lake house paradise. Let her enjoy it, I said calmly. It won't be hers long. Bryn smiled. When you first came to me 2 years ago, I wasn't sure you'd go through with this. You seemed too nice. I thought about that apron. I was nice, I said. I'm done being nice. Bryn started drafting papers. Good. Nice women finish last in divorce court. Bryn and I had been meeting in secret for 2 years, ever since I'd first started suspecting Conrad's infidelity. She'd been advising me quietly, helping me understand my rights, teaching me how to protect myself. You sure you want to pull the trigger? She asked, her finger hovering over the button that would officially file the divorce papers. We sat in her corner office, city lights twinkling below. I thought about the question. 25 years of marriage, 3 children, a life built, however imperfectly. Then I thought about Conrad's voice saying I'd contributed nothing, about standing in front of 200 people holding an apron. He started it, I said. I'll finish it. Bryn clicked the button. Divorce papers filed. He'll be served tomorrow. She pulled out another folder, thick with documents. Now, let's talk strategy. Pennsylvania is an equitable distribution state, which means the court divides marital property fairly. But given his financial misconduct, the hidden accounts, the mistress's house purchased with marital funds, we're in a strong position. We spent 3 hours going through everything. By the time I left her office, I had a roadmap. Tomorrow, his carefully constructed world would start crumbling. I made my first financial move on a Tuesday morning while Conrad was in his office bragging on speakerphone about a new contract. I sat in Harold's office and signed documents transferring funds from a silent holding account I'd established years ago. The account held money from a small inheritance my aunt had left me, money Conrad didn't know about. Over years, it had grown through careful investment. Harold executed the transfer with practiced efficiency. $2.1 million moved from the holding account into a trust structure so complex it would take forensic accountants weeks to untangle. The money was still mine, still legal, just no longer accessible to anyone trying to freeze assets in a divorce. "This is just the first," Harold said. "We have 6 more accounts to move." Conrad's CFO, a nervous man named Frederick, called me on Friday. "Mrs. Drexler, I'm seeing unusual activity. There's a gap of about $2.1 million I can't account for." I kept my voice innocent. "Have you asked my husband?" Frederick hesitated. "He said you might know something." I smiled. "I'm sure it's just a clerical error. My husband handles all our finances. He'll figure it out." I hung up before he could ask more questions. My 53rd birthday arrived on a Saturday in October. I woke up to silence. No cards, no calls, no text messages. Xavier was traveling for business. Kimber had blocked my number. Drew sent a text at noon. "Sorry, Mom. Dad said not to make contact. I don't want to cause problems." I sat alone in the apartment I'd rented, a small furnished place that was temporary. I'd bought myself a cupcake from the bakery downstairs, vanilla with buttercream frosting. I stuck a single candle in it and lit it with a match, watching the flame flicker. 53 years old. 25 of them spent building a life that had evaporated the moment I stopped being useful. I was about to blow out the candle when my doorbell rang. Bryn stood in the hallway holding champagne in a folder. "Happy birthday," she said. I brought presents. We sat at my small kitchen table, the cupcake between us. She opened the folder and spread out papers. Divorce petition, financial disclosures, asset freezing orders, and my personal favorite, the subpoena for his phone records. She looked at me seriously. "You ready to deliver the terms?" I looked at the candle still burning, made a wish, blew it out. "Let's ruin his week." I had Conrad served at the Sterling, the same upscale restaurant where he'd held our anniversary dinner. He was having lunch with business associates, 3 men in expensive suits discussing a merger. The process server was a young woman I'd specifically requested, professional and unflappable. She walked right up to their table, confirmed Conrad's identity, and handed him the divorce papers in front of everyone. The maitre d' told me later what happened next. I'd become friendly with the staff over years, always tipping well, always remembering names. They'd watched my humiliation with sympathetic eyes. Now they watched Conrad's face drain of color as he opened the folder. One of his lunch companions made an excuse and left. The other 2 looked uncomfortable. Conrad stood so fast his chair fell backward. He called my cell 6 times. I didn't answer. Then he tried the house phone, our children, my sister. Finally, he called the Sterling back and demanded to speak to whoever had helped arrange this. The maitre d', an elegant woman named Simone, told him calmly that she didn't know what he was talking about. Then, the entire waitstaff had given him a standing ovation. Not loud, just slow, deliberate clapping. Conrad had left without finishing his lunch. I'd found the prenup mistake 6 months earlier, buried in a document I'd requested from our family attorney. The prenup had been signed 3 weeks before our wedding. A simple document protecting Conrad's business interests. Bryn had gone through it with a fine-tooth comb and found something interesting. There was a clause added after I'd signed, an addendum that changed key terms. But there was no evidence I'd ever seen or signed that addendum. "This is fraud," Bryn had explained. "The original prenup is dated June 15th. This addendum is dated June 22nd. But there's no second signature from you, just an assumption that the original signature covered all modifications." She'd looked at me. "The entire prenup is void. Any lawyer worth their salt would have had you initial every page, but Conrad used his golf buddy." Now, after Conrad had been served, Bryn pulled out the prenup. "He thinks you're playing checkers," she said. "He thinks this prenup protects him. But we're playing chess. In Pennsylvania, when a prenup is found to be fraudulent or improperly executed, it's thrown out entirely. Everything becomes marital property." I stared at the document. "How much?" Bryn smiled. "Conservatively, about $40 million. Conrad's bank called him on a Monday morning. I know because he immediately called me, screaming. 'What did you do?' he shouted. 'My accounts are frozen. I can't access anything.' I kept my voice calm. 'I didn't do anything, Conrad. A judge froze your accounts pending the asset investigation. It's standard procedure in divorce cases involving financial misconduct. "This is insane," he yelled. "I'm gonna sue you. I'm gonna take everything." I smiled even though he couldn't see it. The judge needs to verify what's actually yours versus what's marital property. Given that you've been hiding assets offshore and buying houses for your mistress, it might take a while. Silence. "I don't have a mistress," I laughed. "Conrad, she's wearing my necklace. The apartment records have your signature. The lake house was bought with our joint account. Did you think no one would notice?" More silence. Then his voice changed, became calculating. "What do you want? Money? I'll increase your settlement." I thought about that apron. "I want what I'm owed, that's all." I hung up. An hour later, Felicity resigned. Her resignation letter was brief. "She's 10 steps ahead of you." I called each of my children separately, asking them to meet me at a neutral location. A coffee shop in Shadyside, quiet and public. Xavier came first, checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. Kimber arrived late, sunglasses on despite the overcast day. Drew came last, looking nervous. I didn't offer money, didn't make demands. Just asked them to listen. "Your father and I are divorcing. You're adults. I won't try to buy your loyalty or force you to pick sides." Xavier scoffed. "This is about the money, isn't it? Your mad dad finally called you out for being a leech." The words hung in the air. Kimber nodded agreement. Drew looked at his coffee. "Is that what you think?" I asked quietly. "That I contributed nothing? That your father built everything alone?" Xavier shrugged. "I mean, that's obvious. Dad worked. You, I don't know, shopped?" I stood up. "Then you've made your choice." I looked at Drew. "And you?" Drew met my eyes. "I'm staying with you, Mom." Xavier and Kimber left without another word. Drew and I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, talking about things we should have discussed years ago. The media leak was carefully orchestrated. Not a press release, nothing obvious. Just a quiet phone call to a business reporter I'd met at charity events. "I have a story for you," I'd said, "but I need it to be factual, not sensational." She'd agreed. The article ran in the Pittsburgh Business Journal 3 days later. It was written like a profile piece about Drexler Logistics. But buried in the story were carefully worded mentions of unusual financial activities, properties purchased under third-party names, and questions about corporate governance. The reporter had done her homework. She'd found public records, tax documents, the lake house deed. She'd interviewed former employees uncomfortable with Conrad's relationship with Felicity. The article never explicitly accused Conrad of anything illegal. It didn't have to. The implications were clear. Lawyers from 3 different firms called him within hours. I heard from Frederick that Conrad had thrown a wine bottle at his computer screen when he read the headline, "Logistics Giant Faces Questions About Personal Asset Management." The glass had shattered, red wine spreading across important documents like blood. Appropriate, I thought, for a man who'd just started bleeding publicly. I scheduled the estate auction for a Saturday in November, giving interested parties 2 weeks' notice. The properties listed were ones Conrad assumed were his. The vacation cabin in Vermont, the condo in Miami, the boat slips he'd purchased but never used. What he didn't know was that I'd been paying for all of them from my separate accounts for years. They were mine, legally and completely. The auction house sent invitations to a select list. I'd made sure to include several of Conrad's business rivals, men who'd competed with him for contracts and lost. The preview opened Friday afternoon. I walked through the auction house, looking at my possessions laid out like artifacts. The Vermont cabin had been our family retreat once. Conrad tried to block the auction, filing an emergency injunction claiming the properties were marital assets. The judge reviewed my documentation. Receipts showing I'd purchased each property using funds from my inheritance, my rental income, my investments. The injunction was denied. "Mr. Drexler," the judge had said, "your wife is auctioning her own property. You have no standing to stop her." The auction was scheduled for 10 a.m. I wanted Conrad to watch it happen. Felicity showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, unexpected and desperate. I'd been home for an hour, still in work clothes from meeting with Bryn. When the doorbell rang, I assumed it was a delivery. Instead, I found Conrad's mistress standing in the hallway, her eyes red from crying. "Can I come in?" she asked. Curiosity won. 5 minutes. She sat on my couch, twisting her hands. "He promised I'd be taken care of," she said. "The apartment, the lake house, the jewelry. He said once the divorce was final, we'd get married and it would all be official. I poured myself wine, didn't offer her any. And now, she looked up at me. Now he's saying it was all a misunderstanding. That the lake house was always meant to be company property, that I need to vacate the apartment by month's end. I sipped my wine. He promises a lot, I said. Doesn't he? Felicity started crying. I quit my job for him. I felt nothing watching her tears. The lake house is going to auction next week. It'll probably sell for half what it's worth. You should make arrangements. She left 5 minutes later. The lake house sold 3 days later for $400,000. Conrad invited me to dinner at an Italian restaurant we'd gone to early in our marriage. He'd called it an olive branch, a chance to discuss terms peacefully. I knew it was a trap. I went anyway. Bryn had equipped me with a recording device disguised as a button on my coat, perfectly legal in Pennsylvania. Conrad ordered wine like we were on a date, made small talk about the weather. Finally, over the main course, he got to the point. This divorce is going to hurt both of us. Legal fees, asset division, media attention. Wouldn't it be smarter to settle quietly? I cut my pasta. What did you have in mind? His offer was insulting. $2 million, the house in my name, and I wouldn't contest the prenup or make claims on the business. That's generous, he said. More than fair, considering you never worked. I smiled. And what about the farmland I used as collateral? The money I gave you? Conrad's expression hardened. You can't prove any of that. I pulled out my phone and played back his earlier statement. I stopped the recording. Can't I? His face went pale. You're recording this? I stood up, leaving cash for my meal. You taught me well, Conrad. Always get everything in writing. The family implosion happened faster than Bryn had predicted. Xavier, emboldened by the divorce proceedings, decided he deserved more control of Drexler Logistics. He filed a lawsuit claiming Conrad had mismanaged company funds. The lawsuit revealed that Xavier had been receiving under-the-table payments from the company for years, payments that should have been reported as income. Kimber was caught trying to transfer money from one of Conrad's frozen accounts into her personal account. She claimed her father had given her permission, but the bank's fraud department flagged it, reported it. Suddenly, Kimber was facing questions from federal investigators about wire fraud. Conrad tried to make it go away, but his own legal troubles were mounting. I watched from a distance, never lifting a finger. I didn't need to. Conrad's children had learned from him too well. They'd learned that money was more important than family, that cheating was acceptable if you didn't get caught. Now they were turning on each other. Then I got called to testify in Xavier's lawsuit. I sat in a conference room and told the truth, just the simple, documented truth. What I revealed was far worse than anyone expected. I walked into the courtroom carrying a folder I'd kept hidden for 27 years. Inside was a signed partnership agreement from 1999, the year before Drexler Logistics officially incorporated. The agreement showed that I'd funded the initial company and retained intellectual property rights to the original business name and concept. Conrad had signed it, probably not reading carefully, focused only on getting the money. Your Honor, Bryn said, presenting the document, this agreement predates all corporate restructuring. It establishes Mrs. Vase Drexler as a founding partner with retained rights. The judge read it carefully. Conrad's lawyer objected, called it fraudulent, claimed it was manufactured, but the notary seal was legitimate, the signatures verified. I'd kept it in a safety deposit box for nearly 3 decades. The judge ruled in my favor. Based on this founding agreement, Mrs. Drexler retains significant ownership interest in Drexler Logistics. Mr. Drexler's position as CEO is subject to partner approval, which he clearly does not have. Conrad stood up, shouting, "This is insane! She never worked at the company." The judge looked at him coldly. "Mr. Drexler, she funded it. That's worth more than work." Just like that, Conrad was no longer CEO. The final auction happened on a cold December morning, not of properties this time, but of the house itself. The mansion Conrad had built, the one where he'd handed me an apron. The court had awarded it to me in the divorce settlement. I could have kept it. Instead, I decided to sell it. News cameras showed up, somehow tipped off. Conrad was forced to vacate in front of them, his belongings packed into moving trucks, while reporters shouted questions. Drew helped me hold the door open, a symbolic gesture that meant everything. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. I did. The house sold for $6 million to a tech entrepreneur who planned to gut it and remodel. I didn't care what happened to it. As the auction closed, I handed the keys to someone else, a young single mother who'd won a scholarship from the foundation I'd started with my settlement money. For your future, I told her. She cried. I smiled. The cameras caught it all. That night, the local news ran a story about Conrad's fall from grace. I didn't watch it. I already knew how it ended. I sat in the Sterling's VIP section 6 months after the divorce finalized, the same restaurant where everything had started and ended. I'd requested a specific table, the one where Conrad had been served the divorce papers. The maître de Simone had seated me with a knowing smile. On the house tonight, Mrs. Callahan, she'd said, using my maiden name. I'd corrected the name on everything. Marlene Callahan again. I ordered wine, a good vintage, and looked out at the city lights. Drew was meeting me in an hour for dinner. My son, the only one who'd chosen family over money. Xavier and Kimber had reached out once, asking for help with their legal troubles. I'd declined. Some lessons needed to stick. The waiter brought the wine in a small envelope. This was delivered for you. Inside was a simple card, no signature. You won. I didn't know who'd sent it. I had won, but not in the way they meant. I'd won back myself. The woman I'd been before I learned to be small, before I accepted invisibility. The check came at the end of my meal, and I waved it off. The waiter looked confused. It's already paid for, I said. Everything's already paid for.